breastfeeding, chest feeding, pumping, expressing is another full-time job. Hello to all of you beautiful lactating people. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Elizabeth. I am a labor and delivery postpartum nurse, as well as a certified childbirth educator and mom to 3, including a 5-month-old who is currently napping. Fingers crossed she stays so that I can film this video for you. Sorry my video schedule upload has been super chaotic, but thus is life with 3 children. Being outnumbered is a disaster. Also, we're in the process of moving, so if you want more content from me, head over to my Instagram. I love making reels over there, love doing content for you guys over there that's a little bit faster to do than YouTube, although YouTube is still my #1 passion. So I really wanted to get this video out for you guys. Needless to say, this is going to be my top tips for pumping when you're going back to work. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. The first thing that I want to cover, my first kind of piece of advice, is a real understanding that I'd like for you to grasp as far as how much milk does your baby need and how can we feed a breastfed baby from a bottle in a way that mimics the breast. So first off, breast milk and formula are different. They are both completely valid ways to feed your baby, but they are different in the sense that breast milk changes based on feedback from your baby's saliva, and formula does not change. So with formula, as your baby gets older, you'll need to give your baby more formula to increase the calories. Whereas breast milk, your baby's needs stay relatively about the same from like a month onward. So what we see is that babies tend to take 1 ounce to 1.25 ounces of milk per hour that they are away from the person who's breastfeeding them. Now, will there be times when your baby wants a little bit more? Yes, totally. My recommendation is to send a few bags with 1 ounce or 2 ounces in it so that they can get a little bit more milk without totally going through a whole nother bag. So that's first and foremost most important, because I think a lot of people stress out about supply, that they're not getting enough, when in reality they totally are. The other thing that's important when you are bottle feeding a breastfed baby is that you need to make sure that the person who is feeding the bottle is using a slow flow nipple, so a newborn, preemie, or size 1, somewhere in there, okay? You don't need to go up. Your breasts never flow any faster. And that they are practicing paced bottle feeding. I have a whole video on paced bottle feeding, but basically the gist of paced bottle feeding is that your baby is seated in a more upright position and the bottle is parallel to the ground. And in this way, they're not getting milk dumped into them, but they're having to work to get the milk from the bottle just like they would from the breast. I encourage you to watch that video and to send that video to whoever will be bottle feeding your baby. I also have a video on how to get a breastfed baby to take a bottle, because that can be a whole nother source of stress when we're headed back to work. But this video is going to just be about pumping. But those 2 things, right? How much milk they take and how to give them a bottle is going to be a way to reduce your stress and anxiety that you feel like you're not getting enough milk and that you feel like your baby is drinking way too much milk, because we want to make sure that we're not overfeeding a breastfed baby and we're not giving them a flow that is unrealistic to the breast, because that's when we see babies say, hey now, I prefer the bottle. I'm not confused. I have a flow preference. And we don't want that. Because if a baby takes the correct amount during the day, they might still wake up at night if they need to. That's going to be protective of your supply. Overnight feeds are protective of your supply. If your baby starts sleeping through the night and you notice a big decline in what you're pumping, add another pump in the middle of the night, maybe before you go to bed, to tell your body to keep making milk. Because that's the thing about breasts. They're all different. And really what matters for breast and for breast milk production isn't how big your breasts are, but what is your breast milk storage capacity? And everybody has a different one of how much milk their breast will fill to comfortably. For those with a large breast milk storage capacity, you can go a little bit longer in between pumps perhaps. You can go a longer stretch overnight without it affecting your supply. But if you have a smaller breast milk storage capacity, your breast will fill with milk, and that full breast will tell your body, hey, we don't need to make more milk. Another thing that I think a lot of people don't know, they get their breast pump, it comes with a standard like 24 or 25 and then 27 or 28 millimeter flange. Most people's nipples are much smaller than that. So my advice to you is to get one of those cheap millimeter rulers, circle rulers off of Amazon. I have one somewhere, but I'm not sure where, so I'll insert a picture here, and use that to measure your nipples. You can measure ideally about an hour after breastfeeding or 2 hours after pumping to get your most ideal size. You want to have it on hand too, because your flange size can change. Your nipples can change over the course of your pumping and breastfeeding journey. So the rule of thumb is you measure that nipple, and then for a standard pump, you're going to want to go up 2 to 4 millimeters. My nipple, if you're curious, measures about a 16 on each side. So what I do is I use, and I'm sorry this is dirty, but I pumped this morning and I haven't had a chance to wash it. I use a 21 millimeter flange, and then I use the Bogen cushions. Again, it has milk on it, I apologize. These take your size down by about 2 millimeters. So I go down to a 19 millimeter flange. So I measure 16, I do a 19. Now for the Willow, there is a difference. You want your exact measurement for the Willow. That's the only one that's different. And making sure that you're properly sized for your flange is going to be so important. 1, so that pumping doesn't hurt. 2, so that pumping gets the most milk out. And 3, so that you don't damage your nipples and your areola. So I really love the Bogen cushions. I have what's referred to as elastic nipples. They're very, very, very stretchy tissue. Not everybody has them, so this really helps that tissue from being pulled all the way. If I don't use this, my nipple will go all the way into the flange and hit the back of the flange, and sometimes will bleed. Not cute. Speaking of flanges, let's talk a little bit about the things that I like to have on hand when I'm pumping to make pumping comfortable, increase my output, and make things go a little bit faster. So obviously I have my pump here. I have the Spectra. This is the S1. This has the battery pack, which I love because I do a lot of pumping on the go. But then you also need to have a hands-free pumping bra. So I have 2. This is the one that I use when I can really kind of be seated and focused and help massage my own breasts. This is the Lansano Simple Wishes one, I think is what it's called. I zip it up backwards, so let me show you. I zip it up this way so that I can really get in there and massage my breasts to help my milk come out. We know that breast massage increases milk output by a ton. When I'm driving or when I am charting at work, I will use my Lilu. This has a massaging feature as well. I talked about this before. I have, I think, a $20 off code for this, but you can also stack the whole month of November. They're doing 20% off, so you can stack that as well. And so that does a great job of massaging my breasts while I can have my hands doing other things. So I really, really like that. A cover can be really beneficial if you are going to be pumping in the car. So I like to have that on hand in here. And then I also always have breast milk bags and a Sharpie to mark on them. The other thing that is really beneficial for when you are pumping is a little bit of lubrication so that your nipples don't kind of stick to the flange and pull and feel uncomfortable. I like the Kobo Pump Pleasantly Natural Pumping Spray. This is the one that I use. You can get this on Amazon. So that's kind of all of my things that I have for pumping. I also have a little cooler bag that I can throw things in. And then I also have the Sarah Wells pumping bag, which is great and large and I have used for years. And you know, the handles are starting to come apart, but it is fabulous. So Sarah Wells has a whole bunch of pumping products that are fabulous. Now, when we're talking about supplies, you kind of have 2 options as far as expediting how quickly you can pump. At work, you have the option that is not really super approved by the CDC at this point, but a lot of people do it if they have a healthy full-term infant. And again, this is up to you to decide what you'd like to do, of putting your pump parts in a Ziploc bag and putting them in the fridge in between pumping. That way you're not having to wash and wait for them to dry. You can really spend all of your pump break pumping. If you're uncomfortable doing that, I recommend just getting enough sets so that you have a set for every single time that you pump at work. I also really recommend having extras of everything. Even if you are using your fridge hack, I have extra duckbills because that's what gives us the suction. So if those aren't working, you definitely want to have extras on hand. And it's also just really important that you've got everything together and ready to go so that you can grab and go and not be stuck at work missing something and then you can't pump and empty your breasts. Now, what I will say is sometimes that happens. Sometimes you get to work and you're like, I left my duckbill at home. I left my backflow protector at home. I left something at home. Crap, what do? Hand expression. Hand expression, hand expression, hand expression. If you take nothing else from this video, I want you to go watch the video that I'm going to have linked from Stanford on how to do hand expression. Hand expression is so important, not only because in a pinch, you can take some of the pressure off your breast so that you don't develop mastitis or a clogged duct and your supply won't decrease, because really in a pinch, it is better to get some of the pressure off and get some milk out, even if you can only pump for 5 or 10 minutes, than to skip a pumping session. It's also important if for some reason you don't have your pump, or I personally hand express every single time after I'm done pumping and get another like 1/4 to a 1/2 ounce. So knowing how to get milk out of your breast without a machine is really important. Some people these machines don't work great for, and they exclusively hand express or use a hand pump. So knowing that there are multiple ways to get milk out of your breast besides an electric pump, really, really helpful to know. So now when we're talking about pumping at work, here are my tips for that. The biggest thing with pumping at work that we want to make sure is that we are really using all of our time and all of our resources appropriately. Obviously, if you're breastfeeding, you might breastfeed the baby before you leave for work. But so that we can kind of reset your clock to 0, I really recommend, if you're comfortable with it, and again, there is a little bit of risk because if you were to get into a car accident, the flanges would affect your breast tissue. Pumping in the car is one of my #1 recommendations. Add that pump in the car, that resets your time to 0 and reduces the amount of times potentially that you need to pump at work. I pump in the car on the way to work and sometimes on the way home if my baby's asleep as well, just so that I can fully empty my breast before I get my day going, and that gives me a good 3 hours before I need to pump again. So what are some other ways that we can help get as much milk out as possible? I talked about hand expressing. There are a few other things that I really like to do. So one is to massage either with your hands or with a massage bra, or they have the Levi massagers that also have heat. Adding some heat when you pump are all really, really good things to help initiate letdowns and fully empty your breast. Some people have issues with developing clogged ducts. They like sunflower lecithin. They take that as a supplement. That can help just make your fat less sticky so that it actually comes out of your breasts a little bit easier and reduce your risk of getting a clogged duct. Some people find that focusing on the milk coming out really messes with their head and they can't get a letdown, or they really struggle. There are 2 things that you can do to help with this. One, when you go into the room where you're pumping, get comfortable. Turn the lights down, have a sweater if it's going to be chilly in there, or a blanket, and put on a pump meditation. I'll link my favorite down below. And then take little baby socks or regular size socks and put it over the bottle so that you can't see how much milk is coming out, so that you can't stress about that. And then just really relax and listen to that meditation and just let your body do its thing. You also have the option of looking at pictures of your baby, FaceTiming your baby, bringing a blanket that smells like baby. Even better yet, take a video of you breastfeeding and look at that. That will really get that oxytocin flowing and help initiate a letdown. The other option that some people find really beneficial is a hands-free pump. You have a few different options. So you have the Willow or the Elvie that are completely cord and tube free. You also have some pumps like the Baby Buddha or the Elvie Stride that has tubes but fits inside of your bra. So you can play around with what works for you. Obviously the Willow and the Elvie are quite expensive. There's a pretty steep learning curve for those. So figuring out what your insurance will pay for and going from there is really beneficial. I'm still using my old Spectra from 2 years ago. I do have a Willow pump because my insurance paid for a Willow pump, which was amazing, but I haven't really figured out a way to make it work well for me, and that's because there's such a long adjustment period with the Willow. I did really like the Elvie when I had it, but it leaked. So for me, I'd rather just sit down and pump with my Spectra. I have the Elvie Stride as well, and in a pinch I will use that one at work, but it doesn't empty me quite as well as my Spectra. Again, it's because a lot of these pumps your body has to get used to it, and if you're not willing or having the time to get used to those things, that can be a little bit of an issue. But there are some really great Elvie and Willow Facebook groups that I recommend you join and kind of peruse before buying either one of those pumps. I know a lot of people have really great success with those pumps. I will leave those Facebook groups linked down below. My other big piece of advice for you guys, and this sounds really silly, is be kind to your morning self and get all of this stuff ready the night before. I cannot tell you the amount of times when I'm like, oh, I'm just too tired, I'm gonna go to sleep, and I'll finish drying or putting my pump parts and everything together in the morning. And then I am running late, I'm feeling stressed, my car pump makes way less milk because I'm just so anxious about running late for work, and I'm running like a chicken with my head cut off, which is pretty typical occurrence for me. But when I have everything together the night before and I'm ready to go out the door in the morning, it works so much better. My last piece of advice for you guys is to please be kind to yourself and know that whatever your goals are, we're going to work towards meeting them, right? If you're having any issues with pumping, with breastfeeding, please meet with an IBCLC, but just be kind to yourself. Every ounce of milk that you're able to give them is an amazing gift. And if you need to supplement with donor milk or with formula, that is okay. You're doing a great job. At the end of the day, this is another full-time job. Breastfeeding, chest feeding, pumping, expressing is another full-time job. It's another way that you are taking care of your baby, and it's a lot of work to go back into the workforce and to also be expected to pump and take care of your baby. It's hard to be in two places at once. It's hard to feel really pulled at work between getting your pump in and completing your job. Should we have better support? Yes. Should we have longer maternity and paternity leave? Yes. Should we fight for those things? 100%. This is where we are right now. And if you feel like you have failed at pumping, I promise you, you haven't. If you feel like you failed at breastfeeding, I promise you that you haven't. You have been failed by the circumstances that we are in, by a lack of support, by a lack of insurance coverage, by a lack of adequate leave with your baby. You are enough and you are doing great. Reach out and get support if you can. Definitely leave questions and comments if you have them, and I'll do my best to answer. And until next time, bye guys.